It's podcadzo.
All right, dude. As much as I love our chitter chatter,
Our banter?
our banter, that's become such a trademark for us in podcadzo.
Really, it has. People tell me that they like the way we banter.
Is that real feedback?
It is real feedback.
Nice.
It's praise that I never thought I would receive and appreciate in my life.
I've had one person tell me that, and it was your mom. So I had to take it with a grain of salt.
Still counts. She's still a person with an opinion.
Welcome to podcadzo.
We're going to skip right through the banter, huh?
I said we'd do that.
Mr. Married Man. Or not married, but engaged.
Oh, that banter. Yeah. Okay, that is an important anecdote.
We got to put in a lot of air horns right now. This man got fucking engaged over the weekend.
Engaged to be married. Indeed, I did.
It's fucking crazy.
I just got back from a trip to Portland yesterday, and I went there with my girlfriend, now fiance, and finally popped the old question.
Yeah, finally.
Jillian.
Give everyone a little bit of context here. How long have y'all been together now?
About 9 years.
So it's been long enough.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. And there's obviously been a lot of pressure over the years to do this from various parties, but that didn't influence my I would have done it regardless.
Sure.
I was just never in any rush to.
It's proof that the pressure didn't do anything because you waited 9 fucking years.
Yeah. Yeah, you would have think it'd warm it down.
You're moving at your own
there.
pace.
But lately, it's been like I dread when people ask how long we've been together. They're like 9 years, and
What are you
without
doing?
without a doubt, it's some cliche about getting married.
Well, how's it feel?
Good, real good. It not that sounds negative, but it doesn't feel a lot different. I guess it maybe hasn't settled in
Sure.
totally yet. Set in.
Now, the wedding hasn't happened yet, so
Yeah.
I think that'll be something that sets it in stone a bit.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll do like a big wedding,
Have you
or
guys
official
talked about
wedding
it?
and all. A little bit. Neither of us have ever been on the tip of like having like a big wedding. It just seems like a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was great. We were up in Portland. It was Portland. We just happened to be going on a trip there, but it was fitting because it was like the first road trip we took together. Was out to the Pacific Northwest, and we spent some time in Portland. So I guess there was a nice symmetry to that.
Totally.
Our relationship. We went out there, and yeah, feels good.
Nice.
She said yes. Obviously, if we didn't cover that. And yeah, so now I just gotta actually get married, and then I can chill for the rest of my life.
You can
Nothing
settle
to worry
the fuck
about.
down,
Yep.
man.
Yep.
It's crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm sure that I'm not the first to say it, but I hope I'm also not the last. You guys definitely have been going strong for a long time, and I am happy for you both. It feels crazy watching people that you knew as kind of kids grow up and find a life and settle down and do the damn thing. So it's pretty good stuff, man.
Thank you very
Good
much.
shit.
It means a lot. How was your weekend?
It was normal, man. I just was at work, and I thought about you a few times. I wanted to text you, but I also was thinking I should probably just let you guys have the weekend.
Thank you.
But yeah, I just worked, fucking chilled.
Nice.
Went and saw some monster trucks on Friday night, and that was cool. I saw Gravedigger do a backflip, and fucking I forget the name of the truck, but he did like a cool ass like 2-wheel stand, like a nosy stand for a while, and
like on the
went,
top
like,
of a quarter
backwards and
pipe or something.
forwards. He was like he went off a jump to get on his nose, and then he like went backwards up the jump on his nose, and then he like went forwards again back down it.
Sick.
Yeah, just fucking mechanical brilliance.
Yeah, it really is. Like monster trucks get taken for granted because of the whole like redneck thing. Monster trucks, you.
Yeah.
But like actually watching monster trucks, this is fucking
Dude,
crazy.
actually,
it's like the peak of engineering and athletic skill that people
Yeah.
can do that.
When you're watching it in person, especially I feel like when you are more of an adult, obviously kids aren't going to be like, whoa, that must take so much like precision. But like it really does take a shitload of precision. Even like, you know, what seems like less impressive stuff in Monster Jam, like doing donuts or even just like hitting a solid jump, like everything is about timing.
Yeah.
And you can tell like an experienced, very professional driver apart from like kind of a novice driver just because of those minute timing things that they do to make the jumps like that much bigger, get their nose that much higher in the air, or like get the donut that much faster. It was sick. I mean, I've always like dipped my toes into being like a car enthusiast. I don't like know enough about cars to really say that I'm like
I've always
a
considered you a
hardcore.
heavy
I'm like
enthusiast.
definitely a heavy enthusiast, but I'm not like mechanically inclined or anything like that. But all that being said, watching it in person versus watching kind of just random videos on the internet just does a whole other level of justice.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was cool. That was probably the highlight. Me and Kelsey got to stay in a nice hotel room. Fucking, I don't know. Ordered Dave's hot chicken.
Nice.
It was a good time.
Did you watch the Super Bowl?
I did not. I was working during the Super Bowl. I came out. I was doing dishes. I came out right when the halftime show started, and I watched like a couple minutes of the halftime show. I couldn't really hear what was going on, but then I saw Usher take his shirt off. I was like, all right, well, I think that's pretty much everything I needed to see. So then I went back to doing dishes and didn't watch the rest of the game. When I came home, they were in overtime, and whatever happened. But yeah, I didn't really pay attention to it. Everyone said, I mean, a bunch of people I know who were Chiefs fans said it was a great game, and then everyone else said it was just like a shitty game, normal game. So
yeah, it was definitely good if you like the Chiefs. I thought Usher crushed it though, honestly.
Really?
I thought it was everything you could ask for in a Super Bowl.
Minus Justin
halftime
Bieber,
show.
though.
Minus Justin Bieber.
Biebs
True,
was there.
That was a glaring
he was there
omission.
at the Super Bowl.
I didn't know he was there.
Mm-hmm.
That's even worse.
Pretty awkward stuff.
I really thought he was going to be a part of it. But regardless, so good. We don't need to talk about Usher. Welcome to podcadzo, everyone, if I didn't say that already.
That face you just made was fucking crazy. Years and years of pain just came out through that face.
Why I said we could skip the banters because we have a pretty hefty subject today, and I could see it taking up all of the time. And that subject, something I've been wanting to talk about on the podcast for a long time, and it is the best debut albums of all time.
Yes.
I've been wanting to talk about this because it's one of my favorite things in music to talk about. I think it's fascinating. I love the idea of a great debut album. I'd say the majority of my favorite albums of all time are debut albums. And I'd say what I listen to the most often from artists are their debut albums, or at least like their very early work. And I just think it's a fun thing to debate debut albums.
Yeah. I think the cool thing about debuts for me, obviously, one, it's a new artist, and you discover them for the first time through their debut record. That's like a very special feeling because you're like, whoa, these guys are awesome, and I know nothing about them. It's like a whole new world that you can tap into and new things you can discover. But I also like debuts because some bands that have more lengthy discographies, it becomes more fun to go back to their debut record and see all the ways that they have like grown and changed over the years from their debut. And then also some bands where it's like arguably they peaked in their debut and they've been just steadily declining ever since. I think there's a lot of different levels of debut records. And I also think it's just cool that like from an artist standpoint, just like putting yourself out there for the first time obviously is like really hard to do. And a lot of people, I think, put a lot of like grandiose effort and like very cinematic, almost like noticeable moments into their debuts so that they can be like memorable and establish themselves within the ever-growing world of music.
Mm-hmm. No doubt. So we didn't talk a lot about the criteria for making this list or whatever. We just said, come up with some of your favorite debut albums. So I approached it from the perspective of debut albums I love, but that I also thought were like significant for the bands, and like that the bands had a significance. So like impactful debut albums as a whole. So there's obviously like a lot of like smaller bands that I love their debut albums, but I left those off the list kind of because I was really interested in the idea of like talking about debuts that really like broke through and like had a lot of buzz around them. at some point too, I thought we could consult like Pitchfork or something on their list of best debut albums because I've looked up those lists before. But maybe we come to that after we do our own personal lists.
Sure.
So I say without any further elaboration, we just get right into this. Should we go tit for tat?
Let's just jump back and forth. Yeah.
Cool. All right. You're gonna love my first one.
Yeah. Go.
Oasis.
He doesn't even try to bury it anymore. Doesn't even try to bury it. It's just the first thing we're going to talk about. No need to beat around the bush. Obviously, yeah. Why? Tell me why. I think you already have about 1,000 times, but tell me again.
Definitely maybe is maybe one of the best debut albums of all time. It was released in 1994. It was significant because Oasis in the months before the release built a lot of buzz around them through the music press, through some of the singles they had released, through their personas and interviews on TV and whatnot. So it was kind of an anticipated debut album, and it did not disappoint. And I don't know if we've ever talked about this, Julian. It was actually the highest selling debut album in the UK since the Beatles, believe it or not.
I mean, British people love shit that's inherently super British.
Yeah.
So
It couldn't have, it like was a perfect storm for Oasis. There was this growing Britpop thing that Blur doesn't get enough credit for the success of so many British bands and the whole Britpop thing because they really championed Britpop music and like they were the first ones who kind of made rock British again after it was, all the bands around in the early 90s, late 90s were trying to sound like successful alternative American bands. And Blur really said, we're going to like try to sound like the Kinks and really reclaim British music and sounding British. And Oasis,
lean into it almost to an annoying degree.
Yeah, exactly. Oasis, I don't think were inspired by Blur at all. They were just doing their own thing. But Blur kind of created this buzz and this whole Britpop thing. And then obviously later on there'd be the battle of Britpop with Oasis and Blur. That was after the debut. But definitely maybe. I got into Oasis, I think I've talked about it, through the second album, which is What's the Story, Morning Glory, which has like Wonderwall and all that shit on it. But definitely maybe is my favorite Oasis album. And I think for like most Oasis fans, they would agree. It has not really any songs that became big in America. Obviously, a lot of hits in the UK. Had like Rock and Roll Star, Columbia. Those are probably the big ones. I don't know what else. Oh, Supersonic. Obviously, that was the single that got a lot of buzz. But yeah, it was just a fantastic debut album. I think especially opening up with Rock and Roll Star is like kind of the best thesis statement ever in like a debut album. Like, fuck you, we're Rock and Roll Stars. And
it is
really
very
sets
much like
the
a
tone
thesis
for
statement
Oasis.
for the whole rest of their career.
Absolutely.
And even their solo careers.
Definitely. Everything you need to know about Oasis is in the first album and definitely in that first song. So yeah, it's one of my favorite albums of all time and without a doubt a fantastic debut album.
Nice. Hell yeah. Is it my turn?
Your turn.
All right. I'm going to try to surprise you. I'm going to try to surprise you with this one. All right. My first one. Steely Dan. Can't Buy a Thrill.
Ooh, nice.
I think obviously there's like a lot of conversation already that's been had about Steely Dan, so I don't want to waste time by just sucking Steely Dan's dick and talking about how awesome they are because everyone already knows how great Steely Dan is. But I think just the fact that they came out of the gate so strong with Can't Buy a Thrill, and the fact that so much of Steely Dan's like interpersonal kind of just like the instrumentation and the layout of Steely Dan, it was also like undecided still, that to have it be such like an unsure gesture upon release and then have it be so universally acclaimed is just, I think, why it's such a solid first record. It's not my favorite Steely Dan record, but I think as far as debuts go, it should be mentioned as one of the best debuts ever.
And Steely Dan's so fast. Sorry, they're so fascinating because they really like pivoted a lot from that first album. Like they have a different singer on that album who was never, but they still managed to be so successful after that first album too. And
I was gonna mention essentially their lead singer wasn't convinced he should be the lead singer.
Yeah.
And no one in Steely Dan was convinced he should be the lead singer, which kind of gotta hurt. When they were putting together the songs, and I think the single "Dirty Work" was sang by the other guy, and it wound up being like a charting single. And then obviously by the time the second one comes out, was the second one Pretzel Logic or Katie Lied? I can't remember.
Katie Lied wasn't. Pretzel Logic was third, I think.
By the time the second one came out, there's a lot of changes made already, and I think they were more concrete kind of in their mission statement. But the fact that Can't Buy a Thrill had so many standout singles and was so heavily discussed despite the fact that it was so kind of unsure in its release, I think cements it as a great debut album that encapsulates like a band's entire legendary career in like one kind of solidly composed and also very well sequenced record.
Mm-hmm. Very good choice. I even considered Steely Dan on this one, but that was just never one of my favorite albums, or not one that I went back to a lot on Steely Dan. But totally. Definitely a great album. All right, I'm gonna surprise you with one potentially. Elvis Costello.
That's a big surprise.
My Aim Is True.
That's a big
I haven't really
surprise.
talked about Elvis Costello on the pod ever, but he is one of my favorite artists of all time for sure. He's actually the only guy or artist whose discography I own all of on vinyl. I completed the collection just recently, so I have every Elvis Costello record. But My Aim Is True probably remains my favorite, one of my favorites. And again, like kind of like the Oasis thing, just is a great thesis statement for his career and what Elvis Costello would be about. And I think Elvis Costello is a guy who, if he didn't have that successful of a debut album, he would have not had a career. Like a lot of people get second chances because people see the potential in them. But Elvis Costello was, an unlikely star and unlikely musician to begin with. And it was only through the strength of his songwriting that people were like, damn, this dude is legit. Fantastic debut album.
Nice. Very good. I think the other thing about Elvis Costello is the way that he broke out onto the scene was pretty legendary. Just like the amount of like buzz about the debut before there was a debut. And I was like not really capable of understanding for a long time how much Elvis Costello meant to so many people.
Yeah, totally.
But it was kind of like instantaneously, he was like an instant icon from the beginning of his career.
Well, and also kind of similar to Oasis, there was like a perfect storm of stuff going on around Elvis Costello because he would have existed, I'm convinced, without the punk movement anyways, but he just as a character fit in so well with punk and what's going on, even though he didn't really exemplify the punk ethos other than being just a cool,
cultivated like his own
dude.
Aesthetic, and like he always stayed kind of to the left of exactly what was popular at the moment, but he always channeled it in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
He was always like the hipster version of everything else that was popular.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of the original hipster in a lot of ways.
In a lot of ways, that's true.
All right. Your turn.
Okay, so my next one, I was gonna say Modest Mouse.
Ooh,
Lonesome Crowded West.
Nice.
This record, I think, song to song, again, this is a good example of maybe a band who was peaking creatively very early on in their career. That's not to say that the rest of the Modest Mouse isn't great, because I love all of it. I think it's all fucking brilliant. But I think the Lonesome Crowded West, again, kind of like what we've been saying, is a good thesis statement for where they were going. A lot of the like ideas or kind of like concepts, both from like a songwriting perspective and then just like an actual like guitar playing perspective, bass playing perspective, drumming perspective, like they found what they wanted to do on the first record, and then they've spent the rest of their career kind of like refining that
Yeah.
in a certain way. But again, the way that this record is sequenced is, I think, perfect, and the way that each song connects and there's like a greater story told throughout is something that not a lot of people do on their first record. Is create such a strong narrative, and I think it is a really brave choice. And I also think that a lot of the most iconic Modest Mouse like songs or licks exist on this record.
Yeah.
And I think it probably means the most to the fan base, if I could venture a guess. But yeah.
So it's funny you mentioned Modest Mouse. One, I listened to a bunch of Modest Mouse in Portland this weekend because
Nice.
they're a band I associate with Portland. Two, something I find as interesting as debut albums, sometimes more interesting, is bands who flopped on the debut and like had a breakthrough second album, because I think that's crazy impressive and like would seem impossible to pull off in a lot of cases.
That's why a lot of people say the second record is like the hardest one to make.
Yeah,
because
totally.
you're either following your debut or you're proving that you deserve to make a second record.
Exactly. And Modest Mouse, Lonesome Crowded West album I love and a lot of people love, but they're like an example of didn't really reach any success until Good News for People Who
I think
Love
it
Bad News
reached-
came out.
I think it reached cult success.
Yeah, it was like
relatively
indie
fast,
success,
but it wasn't
but not
popular.
mainstream. Yeah,
True.
so I think it's interesting for like bands to break through as heavily as Modest Mouse did then with like a second I think that was their second.
It was
album,
their
right?
second one. Yeah.
Mhm. So great choice.
Thank you.
Love it. All right, I'll pick something from similar era. Interpol, Turn on the Bright Lights.
Nice.
Yeah.
I don't know how I didn't put that on here. Honestly, fuck. I fucked up.
I don't know. I discovered Interpol when I was just going through my indie rock birth as a young child, as a teen. And of all the cool music that came out of the New York 2000s indie rock scene, and we've talked about a lot of that, I think Interpol stands out as one that really holds up, and it's a timeless, important album.
Yeah.
Where a lot of those albums were like important in the scene and for the time, but
Or like
they don't
a
really hold up in
song
time.
from
Yeah,
a
it's not-
record.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's like it's Interpol's a seminal album, I'd say, and influenced like so many people around him. And
Totally. And also, like, this is kind of an aside, but how I discovered Interpol was when I was in like second grade. The magazine NME,
yeah,
they used to put out like mixtapes that were put together by bands or artists, and it was just like a CD that came with the magazine of like that artist's favorite bands or whatever. I bought the U2 one, and it had a mixtape of Bono and The Edge's favorite songs, and Obstacle 2 was on it.
nice.
And I just remember thinking like, and this is gonna sound shitty, but as soon as I heard it, I was like, man, this is like U2, but it's just like better in
Cooler.
every single
Yeah.
fucking way. Like,
Yeah,
it's just elevated. It's elevated, and the way that they have built their career out since then fucking fascinates me, because like they could have been a one-hit wonder band or gone for like 1 or 2 radio singles per record, because obviously they had the popularity to do so.
yeah,
But they've started doing like concept records over their last few releases, and they've started really leaning into like 1 or 2 or even just like 3 or 4 specific ideas per record. And that to do that like later in your career after us being established as like just such a big deal within rock, and to do it well, it just blows my mind. Like, I have so fucking much respect for those dudes.
oh for sure.
They're
I think
so
Paul
talented.
Banks is one of the coolest dudes who's ever existed.
No
too.
kidding.
It's so fucking dope, and it makes sense that you two would like him because the big thing, like what everyone was saying about Interpol when Turn on the Bright Lights came out, is like, you'll love these guys. They're just like Joy Division. Like, it's like a cool post-punk thing. And U2, I watched this Ian Curtis documentary, and Bono actually narrated it. And he talked a lot about how at the time, when their careers were both starting, Bono felt really threatened by Ian Curtis. And there was this weird thing going on where it's like, Bono's this like wannabe poser, try hard. Ian Curtis is the real deal. Like he's the voice of our generation and true rock star. I think Bono obviously struggled with that a lot, but I think he had a huge respect for Ian Curtis and Joy Division, that whole thing. So it makes sense that they're like it.
Yeah, well, and I think it also just is interesting too. Like we always or not. We have this conversation somewhat frequently just about how our favorite artists, are always inspired by people that we either usually kind of like or we hate or sometimes we love them. It's just cool to see a really good band very clearly influenced by another really good band, and there's like mutual respect there. It's inspiring.
Yeah.
All right, next one.
Next one.
Cool. My next one is going to be the Black Midi album Schlagenheim.
Hey, nice.
So I had to throw this one up because it's not too often that I listen to a band. It's not too often that I discover a new band to me and I listen to their debut and I'm immediately like pulled in. I usually have to listen to like the later albums first and then work my way backwards. Black Midi is one of the few where it was like the complete opposite. Like as soon as I heard the very first notes on the first song on Schlagenheim, I was like, oh, I'm in. Like I already know I'm going to love this. And Schlagenheim is like the reason why I love Black Midi for what they are. And I also appreciate all the ways that they've grown and changed and been able to work different concepts into their ethos like over the last few years, because when you compare it to the first album, it's like everything that happens on the first album really is kind of like a one-off. Like conceptually and obviously like sonically, performance wise, it's still Black Midi all the way through their catalog, but the first album just has like an attitude to it, a heaviness to it, and a rawness to it that makes it just like almost primal in some ways. And it's so grabbing and it's so like instantly it just instantly makes you very interested in what's going on. And I also think as far as like acclaim for debut records, this one had a lot. Like no one knew who Black Midi was, at least no one in the States knew who Black Midi was. And then Schlagenheim came out and everyone was talking about it. Like Fantano rated it super highly the year that it came out. It was like on his top 10 or maybe top 20 list. Pitchfork rated it super highly. Consequence of Sound rated it super highly. Like everyone was just like, this is a solid record. And it fucking is. And they've grown so much since then, but despite the growth, you can still go back to Schlagenheim and listen to it and it still just fucking rips. Like it's just great every time you put it on. So
hell yeah. You got me into Black Midi a couple years ago. You were the first one to turn me on to them. And I dig them. I haven't spent enough time with Schlagenheim specifically though. So I'll have to like do an actual listen through of that.
It's just so fucking heavy, dude. It hits so hard. I love it.
Hell yeah. All right. I think this is a good next one to mention. Pavement. Slanted and Enchanted.
All right, educate me.
I debated putting this on the list. I'm a big Pavement fan. And I'm a Pavement fan, I think, pretty much only because of this album. I like some of their, like, Crooked Rain is a good album. But Slanted and Enchanted, especially in recent years, is one I just go back to and listen to a lot. We've talked about this, and it always surprises me that you have kind of a lack of like 90s indie rock interest.
Yeah.
Like you're not a Pavement dude. You don't like Built to Spill. You don't like Gathered by Voices.
It just never came onto my radar somehow. I just never really got around to listening to any of it.
And it's fair. A lot of those bands suck and sound exactly like each other. None of the bands I just mentioned. I just mean, kind of the lesser 90s indie rock bands. But I think Pavement is the quintessential one. And obviously Stephen Malcolm is an influential dude. He's had a big career post-Pavement. But this album, I think, is like, without a doubt, it's like what was 90s indie rock about? Like this weird lo-fi indie rock thing I'd put on Slanted and Enchanted. It sounds bad in an amazing way. You can tell it's produced in a basement with minimal production. The songwriting is like, this sounds so cock to say, but like naive, kind of like early songwriting, but like just truly from the heart, just dudes like writing what they wanted to write about and playing riffs that were fun to play. And it's since then, like, you know, become a big cult album and has a lot of critical acclaim. But I just think it's a great album, one I listen to a lot, and like a really important debut album that without it, I think a lot of other bands wouldn't have had a career in the 90s.
Damn, that's
Yeah.
good to know. I will add it to my list.
Yeah, dude.
All right. My next one is going to be the Coldplay album Parachutes. Again, kind of like what I was saying for like Steely Dan. This album just cemented them in a lot of ways, and the release, it's not like it was an unsure release. I just think that maybe considering where music was going at the time that Parachutes came out, it was like a bit of a risk that they took to put out such a soft release.
Mm-hmm.
But it was so hyped at the same time. Like, obviously, like Yellow, Clocks is on the next one, but I think Trouble was the other one. They had Trouble and those singles both like performed super well. I remember one, and it's going to sound kind of interesting to say, I don't think I've ever really had this emotion before, but like when I was really little and my dad put on Trouble and it was like still a single before the album even came out.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as it started playing, it felt like one of those songs I kind of like always known in like a super cheesy way. Like it just felt super familiar. It felt very like homely. It always felt very comfortable. And it always was just like one of those songs that if I heard it, like brought me back to that emotional place of just being like, this is something comfortable. This is something warm. The whole record is, again, just like really honestly perfect from start to finish. There's nothing I would really change about it. And it put them on the map in such a large way that, you know, they could afford to kind of take more chances on the second record and step out of their comfort zone a little bit more, and they'd still have a pretty massive fan base to like understand where they were trying to go. And also, it should be noted, I think Coldplay sucks now. I think they've been like really bad for a long time.
Yeah.
But I think that to come out of the gate with a debut like Parachutes and then have Rush of Blood to the Head and then X and Y and then Viva La Vida, there's not too many bands where it's such an uphill trajectory for such a long time, and like release after release is just solidly building. And I think Parachutes laid the groundwork for all that in a like really, really good way. So
hell yeah. You another influence you had on me were the first dude who taught me it's okay to like Coldplay. Because all I had known from anybody else was Coldplay hate. So there was a lot of Coldplay I loved, and that first album especially, I was obsessed with Yellow when it came out.
Me and my buddies, specifically me and Will and Robert, have always kind of wondered to ourselves why people don't like the early Coldplay more.
Yeah.
Especially like the album X and Y. Like I think that album is probably their best album in a lot of ways. And it's just, I mean, when it came out, it was very popular. It was discussed a lot. It charted well. People revered it. And then it kind of just fell off. And I mean, obviously so much comes out and people move so quickly and change so quickly that not everything can have like a shelf life. But it's always been weird to me that out of all the things we come back to as like a society, like the earlier Coldplay is not one of those things. Like it's still kind of cringy to say out loud, I like Coldplay and I don't think Chris Martin is a huge fucking douchebag.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is what
I don't
it
think
is.
he's a douchebag.
Coldplay fans, obviously there's enough Coldplay fans out there that it's kind of a moot point to say Coldplay sucks. Yeah, I appreciate their early career, and their early career influenced me so much as a musician that it's like one of those things I wouldn't trade for anything else.
Yeah, dude. That's sick. It's been a long time since I've just listened to the first album all the way through. So I'm definitely gonna do that. All right. I think it's a good one to do next. The Cars.
Nice. Okay.
The Cars, self-titled debut. I think that you see this on like debut album lists often, I think, because it's just crazy impressive every single fucking song was a hit single. And just like a masterclass of rock, pop, songwriting,
Yeah,
kind of post new wave songwriting.
Yeah, the amount of different like kind of nuances in the Cars songwriting is what separates them from like a lot of other like 70s and 80s like cock rock that's kind of mediocre. Like
Yeah.
and like I think like I'm pretty sure it was either Sting or Stuart Copeland from the Police talking about the subtle like genius in the Cars songwriting. Like it is super poppy music, but just the amount of like small choices that they make from a songwriting perspective, just like they make it like profound.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they are pop songs, but like the most tasteful and artistic form of pop songwriting that could be. And they like there's a lot of, especially at that time, probably so much pressure on bands to be kind of like cool and edgy and stuff. The Cars were like kind of lame in a way that was so fucking rad that, I don't think anyone thought they were lame or anything, but just like the production style they undertook, everything was like understated. There's kind of like cheesy instrumentation even in some places with the keys and synth parts, and like very, very major scale, guitar songwriting. But it's like such a beautiful album and such a cool album. And I, for a long time, have aspired to write music like that and like mix music like that, where it's so well produced. Everything has its own little pocket in the mix. You can hear everything so crisply and clearly. And we never talked about this, but in like the early Wax stuff, I was listening to so much Cars, and I really wanted to like do Cars stuff. I don't think that came through at all, but yeah, love that album.
Nice, very solid. Yeah, I think that's another one that, as far as talking like instant cultural success, like that debut was like an instant cultural success. People instantly latched onto it, and it's now kind of a time capsule record. Like people, if they're looking to feel nostalgic for a specific time period, they'll go back to the Cars debut.
Yeah, it's hard to think of a album with more songs placed in more movies as well.
Yeah,
I think Cars are kind of like the ultimate movie band.
That's true.
Yeah, which says a lot about it.
True.
They're universally loved songs.
All right, well, since we're going back a little bit, I'll go back a little bit. My next one, I'm going to say the Led Zeppelin debut. Led Zeppelin. Obviously, there's a lot of Led Zeppelin records that people say are better than this one, and arguably I would agree.
Mm-hmm.
There are Led Zeppelin records I like more than this. But that being said, this record is a very good establishing record. And it's charming almost. Obviously, in hindsight, now it's charming because Jimmy Page is Jimmy Page and Robert Plant is Robert Plant. Like, they're iconic, and no one would ever try to say that they're not some of the best musicians that have ever lived. But on this record, they're still, like, figuring it out. You can still kind of, like, hear people within the record, like, trying to figure out exactly what it is that they want to do and, like, exactly how the three of them play together and form the chemistry that becomes what it is. I think the record having the charm that it has, and also, again, being culturally establishing as like, hey, we're going to be here for a long time and we're going to be very heavily influencing everyone else. Like, I think the record like says that in its
it left
presentation.
no doubt in anyone's mind.
Yeah.
Like, these guys are not playing around.
100%.
It's fucking crazy.
Yeah. So
for sure. I always love that. I think Zeppelin, like if I'm hard pressed, Zeppelin 1 and 4 are my favorites. What I listen to the most often.
4 and then like Houses of the Holy for me.
Yeah, Houses of the Holy, fucking great too. Great choice. I thought about Zeppelin 1. So here, I'm gonna go a little further back to The Doors.
Robert Johnson.
The two songs he cut in a radio.
Best debut record of music.
The Doors.
Nice.
Their debut.
Okay. This might be the first one where I kind of disagree with you.
Yeah. And fair. I almost didn't put this on the list, but I wanted one from the 60s pretty bad. It's hard to find great debut albums in the 60s because that's still kind of when the album was a
Yeah, the album was more of a mixtape.
exactly. It wasn't a formed thing. It wasn't an art form or like a finished product to put out. It was a collection of singles and like bands in the '60s, like the early Beatles and Rolling Stone albums. They're not albums at all. They're just like bubblegum pop songs that they put out,
Right.
trying to get radio hits. The Doors, I think of all those early '60s groups, were the closest to anyone in like putting out a somewhat conceptual, cohesive rock album.
Mm-hmm.
And
It still lacks cohesion.
yeah, it gets, you're right, it is more of a collection of songs than a real album.
It is a lot closer than,
but
like,
yeah, it
say
gets
the
a lot
Beatles or
closer
the Rolling
than
Stones.
yeah, and it just has kind of like the Cars, so many of those songs are stone cold hits.
Yeah.
And
So many people, and this is one of those cultural things that I kind of understand, and it kind of confuses me at the same time. So many people have latched onto the Doors and specifically Jim Morrison lately
yeah,
that it's kind of weird. Like, I know some people who are like 6-7 years younger than me who like their favorite band is the Doors.
That's
and it's
weird.
very interesting. They're kind of like hipster trash, so it kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
But
I have made the case to you in the conversation before that the Doors might be my pick for best American band of all time.
it's true.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I disagree very heavily, but
yeah,
that's okay.
That's okay.
I like modern music. Some people like old music.
Yeah, very true.
I mean, you like modern music. I'm not trying to say you don't.
No, I just
Every album you've mentioned is from
the Doors
the
is
90s at the latest. But
yeah. My regret was not having more recent debuts, but it's hard because again, my personal criteria for this list was like albums that really had a cultural significance, and for a lot of bands like Black Midi, even potentially like too hard to tell
there's
how
so
much of a
many
significance it's going to have.
subcultures now versus back then.
Look, I almost put Viagra Boys' debut on here because I'm a big Viagra Boys fan.
You should have.
Yeah, so I'm doing that right now. Viagra Boys. But anyways, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I feel you. And I think it's an important distinction to make too. Like, in the 70s, in the 80s, being culturally successful was, I think, easier in a lot of ways because culture was more of one unified body.
Mm-hmm.
There was obviously still lots of subcultures and lots of subsects of things, and people had their little tunnel vision on in the 70s and the 80s too. But now it's like when you're talking about bands like Black Midi, for example, like being culturally significant can be still relevant if you're only affecting a subculture of like 100,000 people or even less.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Versus back in the day, you had to influence like millions of people before
there was
like,
one culture.
Yeah.
In Black Midi's case, this could be my own naive take on it, but I associate Black Midi and like that their kind of breakthrough with like pushing a lot of other great UK indie bands through. Like I just feel like it brought a lot of attention, especially to that scene,
Definitely.
like Black Midi coming. So
Definitely.
it definitely had significance.
And
in
I
that
think
way.
also part of that is more independent like music reviewers or blogs kind of reviewing stuff that wouldn't be covered necessarily by bigger blogs, and kind of forcing the bigger blogs' hand in certain ways because 10 small blogs are all talking about this one record that everyone loves, then the big blog kind of feels more pressure to put out a piece on it.
Yeah, we gotta stay relevant.
Yeah, exactly. And that's how it circulates. All right, anyway, I'll get a little more modern here. We'll take it back up to the 90s, and I'll mention this band because we, in my opinion, have not talked about this band enough. They're one of my favorite bands of all time. Definitely like top 5, maybe even higher. System of a Down.
Nice.
The System of a Down debut.
Mm-hmm.
This put them on the record. It put nu metal on the record. It changed the direction of like all popular metal music in the late 90s, early 2000s. It showed people on a small scale and a large scale that like your audience will be okay with experimentation and stepping outside of the bubble if you do it genuinely.
Yeah.
If you don't half-ass it. This record is fucking wild. It's all over the place. It kind of, like you were talking about the Pavement record, sounds a little shitty. Like it has some charm to it.
Yeah.
It's not polished. It's not clean. It's not like, squeaky and great sounding. It's a little jarring, but it is performed start to finish 100% with intention and just genuine like performing just wizardry.
Yeah.
And every single song on it fucking slaps. I don't think there's many bands where you can point to an individual band and say this band influenced this list of other bands, but with System of a Down in their debut, they did exactly that. Like they changed the entire course of metal and new metal and even just like melodic hard rock in the 90s and 2000s.
What always like blew my mind about System of a Down is just how much it comes through on the record, how fucking talented they are and like great at their instruments.
Right.
And
because they can play like a riff that's comprised of like one or two notes and
Yeah.
it's still like the heaviest thing you've ever fucking heard.
oh, for sure. And they're just like always go for it 100%. Like what you were saying, like if you are actually genuine about it and like put your heart in being weird and experimental, but like fucking go for it 100%. And it works. There's nothing better than that.
Yeah.
Always. So, great pick.
Thank you very much.
I got to go revisit that one as well. I think I mentioned I've been listening to more System of a Down lately, revisiting
System of a Down. Okay, so System of a Down, like you were talking about Elvis Costello and your vinyl collection, I think System of a Down is one of like 2 or 3 artists where I have every single record on vinyl.
Mm-hmm.
So let's listen to it sometime.
That'd be great. All right.
On vinyl, it's jarring. Like it takes it to another level.
Partly in the interest of time and partly because these are all kind of boring picks that kind of belong on the list together anyways, I'm just going to rattle 3 off together. The Strokes, Is This It? Vampire Weekend, and Arctic Monkeys.
Okay.
Whatever you say I am, that's what I'm not.
All right, perfect. I had Arctic Monkeys and Vampire Weekend on my list.
Fantastic. I didn't mean to say boring, like disparaging any of those, but I think they're obvious picks for me. Like, you know, I'm
kind
gonna,
of for both of us.
Yeah, for both
in
of
some
us.
ways.
You left the Strokes off though, huh?
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah,
that was just never your band. So Strokes, that's well covered ground. What an important album is this? It was. Vampire Weekend. We've talked a lot about
Ad
Vampire
nauseam.
Weekend ad nauseum on this podcast. So let's talk about Arctic Monkeys.
Sure.
Whatever you say I am, that's what I'm not. In recent years, has become maybe my favorite Arctic Monkeys record. It was always up there as one of my favorites, but I was really just rolling with the punches for a while. I was like, whatever was the new Arctic Monkeys. That's
we're making lounge jazz now.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. I was definitely one of the dudes that when Tranquility Base Hotel and Casino came out, I was like, no, dude, I know it sounds like it sucks, but it's actually pretty
good.
And then the car came out, and I was like, okay, I can no longer defend this. And actually, yes, I admit that Tranquility Base is a shitty album now, too. So I really went back. My favorite Worst Nightmare is probably my favorite Arctic Monkeys.
Yeah.
It probably always has been. And then I like Humbug a lot, too. Joshua Homme, shout out. But whatever you say I am, that's what I'm not, is such a fucking sick album.
Yeah.
And just has so much like personality and dopeness and like.
And again, if we're talking about bands that kind of instantly cemented themselves, I think Arctic Monkeys is a really good example because they came out brash, they came out swinging, they came out heavy, kind of loud, fast.
Yeah.
More British than the average American can handle. And again, kind of like what I said about Parachutes. When I listen to anything on the first Arctic Monkeys record, it brings me back to like being a kid and being like,
totally.
oh my God, this is fucking awesome.
And just like no one ever wrote music like that because they truly like the thing with Arctic Monkeys was like they didn't know how to play their instruments. Like they just formed a band like we're gonna figure this out and write songs.
Alex Turner just wanted a girlfriend.
Yeah, exactly, and just wanted to be like the Strokes pretty much. But what they did is just so unique and like could only come from dudes like learning how to do it together.
Yeah, figuring it out as you go.
Yeah,
and I think kind of just talking about favorite Worst Nightmare. I think that would be my favorite too, just because it is like the perfect realization of everything on the first record. I think the first record still has that charm because they're like figuring it out. And then there's one in between the first one and favorite Worst Nightmare, right?
No, favorite Worst Nightmare.
It's the second one?
Yeah.
Okay. Well then, yeah, either way, the like connections between the two records, I think is pretty astounding of like how much they were able to figure out in such a short amount of time. And when you look back at most bands who are kind of figuring it out as they go, their debut's like not charming really anymore.
Yeah.
But the Arctic Monkeys one is always just so fun to
Yeah, it
listen
holds
to.
up so well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been listening to it a lot lately. And yeah, it's just such a unique album. And Arctic Monk, like not as clear as a trajectory as Coldplay, obviously, but like pretty impressive that they could go from My Favorite Worst Nightmare to AM.
Yeah.
There was a lot of like tangential moves in between then with Humbug and different albums. And then they've obviously kind of ruined their legacy with the last two albums. But
I honestly wasn't really a big fan of AM.
yeah.
And I know that a lot of, I don't know, I think a lot of Arctic Monkeys fans that I knew when AM came out did that thing where they were just like, oh, I like it. It's good because it's an Arctic Monkeys album. I have to like it. And they're just like sticking by that. And it's always kind of confused me because I just like, if you're an Arctic Monkeys fan and you say AM's your favorite one, you're not an Arctic Monkeys fan. They just like took all of the steam out of everything that was on their earlier albums, in my opinion.
Yes, they took away a lot of that swagger and the kind of the cool factor they had going from them on the earlier stuff.
Only to try to bring it back later and
in
look like old,
horrible,
cheesy
pathetic
fucks.
way. Yeah. But I think objectively, AM is a impressive album. And like, again, songwriting wise, every song on that album was
a performer for sure.
Yeah, it was a hit. All right, we're running a little bit low on time.
I'll fly through a couple.
Yeah.
This one will be obvious. Outcast, Southern Playlist at Cadillac Music.
Nice.
We've talked about it enough. Again, this album got me into old school hip hop, got me into the art of rap. Like, this album's the reason why I like rap. So I put it on here for that reason. The Local Natives debut.
Nice.
Again, kind of talking about like Coldplay and Arctic Monkeys. The first time I heard this record, I was instantly hooked. I listened to it all the fucking time. Local Natives was my first like favorite band that was like my favorite band, you know, that like I discovered them. They were my thing.
Yeah, I've always associated them with you, yeah.
So yeah, that record means a fuckload to me. And then another one, the Spiritualized record, Ladies and Gentlemen,
Nice.
We Are Floating in Space.
Great album.
Again, this record was proof of concept from the very beginning for what Spiritualized was going to do for kind of the rest of their career. But I think, again, people look back at this record as like a time capsule a little bit, and they also, I think, look back on it and feel like it kind of was peak performance for Spiritualized in some ways. I don't necessarily feel that way. I think that a lot of the newer Spiritualized is my favorite. But when I go back and listen to Ladies and Gentlemen in Space, it does make me think for a second, like, oh, maybe this one is my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that it holds up that well after, 25 plus years of existence means a lot to a lot of people. And then next one, the Jack White solo record, Blunderbuss.
Nice.
I think this one's also obvious for me. After Local Natives, it was pretty much Jack White, and it was pretty much back to back. I got into Jack White when 16 Saltines came out as a single, and at that point, I was not super into the White Stripes. And everything on Blunderbuss was, again, just like on repeat for me for like years. Like, I listened to that record so much, and it meant so much to me. And the way that I discovered White Stripes after kind of listening to Blunderbuss made me realize, like, this guy did like the opposite of stripping back. Like, most people have their project that's like their career, and it's just like this whole thing. Like Radiohead, for example, they just build and build and build and build and build towards this trajectory that's like at some point no longer attainable to follow. White Stripes was kind of the opposite. They built on this trajectory and then disbanded, and Jack White reformed himself as like a multi-instrumentalist, blues, folk, Americana, rock, fusion that like people might have seen coming if they knew Jack White, but it would have never been so like obvious or predictable. And then you listen to Blunderbuss and you're like, oh, this guy's been doing this shit forever. The performances on it, the musicians on it, the sequencing of it, the production of it, everything about it's perfect. It might be my favorite debut record of all time.
Wow. That's a big statement. I would have never guessed that.
It's up there.
The Blunderbusses. So, great pick. I struggled with like an artist like Jack White putting their debut albums because, yeah, of course, that's by definition a debut album of his solo career. But like The Smile, I was tempted to put The Smile, Light for Attracting Attention on here. I was like, does that really count as a debut?
I put that on too, and hear me out. The reason why I put The Smile on here specifically was because it must feel really good to be Tom York and Johnny Greenwood and put out a debut that's that fucking solid when the only other shared debut that they have is Pablo Honey, and they look back at that and probably are not too proud of themselves. So I just thought it was interesting, you know, if Tom York and Johnny Greenwood make it to like their 90s, they'll look back at A Light for Attracting Attention and probably be like, we fucking nailed it.
Yeah.
Whereas looking back at Pablo Honey, which is the record that put them on the map, they'd probably look back at that and be like, well, there's a lot we could have done differently here.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. All right. Let me, in the time we have left, let me rattle off my last few that I didn't mention. Then we're going to look at the Rolling Stones top 10 debut albums of all time. And then there's something else I want to mention. All right. Albums I didn't mention. Guns N' Roses, Appetite for Destruction.
Thank God you didn't mention that.
Yeah, that's just one that, like, objectively is a great debut album. And I really never listened to Guns N' Roses, but as a younger kid, it was something I liked, and I don't know, an impactful album.
I don't know.
Joy Division, Unknown Pleasures.
Okay.
Obviously, I love Joy Division. Pearl Jam, 10.
Okay. Since you said Pearl Jam, I'm going to say Soundgarden, Louder Than Love.
Okay. I considered Soundgarden, but again, I just like, Soundgarden is one of the bands, what I want to talk about later, who like, not that was a flop or like a bad album or anything, but like really managed to break through and define themselves with the second album.
Yeah. I just listened to it now and I think kind of like what we were talking about earlier, like why don't more people revere this highly? Why isn't this talked about as being one of the greatest recordings of all time? Because that's really how I feel about Louder Than Love. And it's not even my favorite Soundgarden album. I obviously Down on the Upside is and forever will be my favorite Soundgarden album. But Louder Than Love, again, they just came out swinging so fucking hard and they got so grungy so fucking quickly. Like, I don't know how people call Nirvana grunge because listen to Soundgarden and then listen to Nirvana.
They're
just not
even
on
Pearl
the same
Jam was so
level.
much heavier
You're
than
right.
Nirvana.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. My dad actually said that. He's like, we always thought Nirvana was kind of like lame, and we're like, listen to Pearl Jam.
It's
like
just
those guys are heavy.
Yeah.
Anyways, we don't need to get into Nirvana right now. All right, Rolling Stone top 10. This is gonna be crazy. Number 10, Liz Phair, Exile in Guyville.
What?
Super wild. Have never listened to it. Let's skip over that. Okay, I'm bummed to see The Clash on here because I wanted to put The Clash on here. I've talked about The Clash, one of my favorite bands of all time. A lot of Clash albums are my favorite albums of all time. But Clash is one I was going to put in the other category of like bands who really got it right with the second album. I love that first Clash album. It's fantastic, but it's a little bit all over the place.
Okay.
Them so trying to find them footing. London Calling is the album.
We had exactly the same thought about this.
Yeah.
I put this on my list and then I took it off about 30 seconds later because I was like, there's no way that I'm going to bring up The Clash and then not wind out just talking about London Calling the entire fucking time. I think London Calling, definitively, we've never said this out loud. I think London Calling might be the best record ever made. It's probably in the top
most
4.
days I would agree with you. Yeah. It's definitely it's at all times in my top 5 albums of all time.
Definitely.
And I would agree it's maybe the best album of all time. Guns N' Roses, Appetite for Destruction, number 8.
Boo!
Look who's a fucking music writer Colin is.
Because the Rolling Stone.
Because I agree with the Rolling Stone list. Billie Eilish. When
Oh
we all
my
fall asleep, where do we
God.
go?
So the fact I'm okay with Billie Eilish being on the list of maybe like the top 50,
Yeah.
but she's
She's
number
not in the,
fucking 7. And people are already kind of done talking about Billie Eilish. Like,
did this album
look at number 6.
Jimi Hendrix Experience?
People
or
are still
Experience?
talking about the Jimi Hendrix Experience, and they came out in 1967.
Yeah.
People are almost done talking about Billie Eilish, and that record came out in 2019. Like, that's what's wrong with the fucking Rolling Stone.
Yeah. All right.
Where's Blunderbuss?
Yeah, Jimi Hendrix was number 6. 5, Patti Smith, Horses. I love this album. I honestly didn't know it was. I thought she had one album before Horses, or I would have maybe
No,
considered
Horses
this on
is
the list.
Horses
Okay,
is
Horses
the
is
debut, but also I do think, again, it's an instance of her second album might be better than her first.
Totally. Well, this is the one, like, in hindsight, everyone's like, wow, like, this is fucking great. But yeah, it was. I remember, like, she really struggled after this, and why she, like, went and, like, sung, like, Bruce Springsteen songs after this one, because she was looking for mainstream success and she didn't get on Horses. Okay, well, solid pick. 4, Wu-Tang Clan. I did great pick. This was kind of on my list, but I just didn't mention it. What do you think of that?
It's definitely fair. I think, obviously, you're talking about a record that influenced a lot, and people, again, are still talking about it.
Velvet Underground.
Again, boo.
I like the Velvet Underground, but
I like the Velvet Underground
again,
too.
I just don't think I don't think this is a great album.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. I don't
Yeah.
even think Andy Warhol would agree with this. Like,
Yeah.
the point of Velvet Underground was not to be the best of anything. It was to just be fucking weird and artistic and expressive. And in order for it to be one of the best debuts on the list of best debuts, I feel like it has to be a record that everybody likes.
Yeah.
And definitely not everybody likes the Velvet Underground. There's a lot of haters.
Yeah, definitely. And especially on that album. 'Cause
Yeah.
It was, number 2, Notorious B.I.G., Ready to Die.
I would have put this on here, but honestly, the Junior Mafia I think the Junior Mafia debut is better than the Notorious B.I.G. review.
Yeah.
So
There was, like, that Biggie, Wu-Tang, I kind of wanted to put on the list, but I was like, if I start including, like, all the debut rap albums I like, this never good. So I focused on rock primarily. But yeah.
I just think,
not hated there
again,
for
like,
Rolling
people
Stones
always
picks.
talk about Biggie Smalls, but then no one ever knows who Junior Mafia is or what Junior Mafia is. And
Yeah.
I think Biggie's performances are a lot more measured on Junior Mafia stuff. Like, he's not quite as balls to the wall as he is on his debut solo, but just the collaborative nature of Junior Mafia and how much more like gangster it is versus being like self-reflective, I feel like it's just better.
Yeah.
But it's just me.
No, fair point. All right. And number 1 on the Rolling Stones top 100 debut albums of all time, the Ramones. This
Coming
is the
from a
most
Ramones
pandering
fan,
ass
yeah.
pick by Rolling Stone ever.
Coming from a Ramones fan, this is definitely wrong.
Yeah. I love the Ramones too.
I think, again, even the Ramones, seeing this being number 1 on the Rolling Stone list might be like, I think you guys might have missed a few.
Yeah. I think if their only criteria was like most influential debuts, you can make a case for that, because the Ramones maybe one of the most influential bands of all time, and for like what they did for punk in the late 70s with this album, impactful. But as an album, great songs on the album, and
Right.
stuff, but it's like,
Again, we're talking about a band, especially on Ramones, we're talking about a band who didn't really know how to play their instruments yet.
Mhm.
So as far as musical content, there's even Ramones records that are musically better than Ramones. And I just don't... I get the vibe always that, like, whoever writes these articles are just, like, old people that refuse to let go of, like, the journalism of yesteryear when it comes to music, because
Yeah.
I just don't think most of the world really thinks that Ramones is the best debut of all time.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of Ramones fans out there who probably also would even put other Ramones records above that. So
Oh, for sure. All right. So the we've talked about it a little bit, and like I said, I find this fascinating as well. In addition to debut albums, bands who blew it on the first record and broke through on the second.
sure.
Radiohead, I think, is one of the best examples of that. Pablo Honey, although it had Creep on it, so we can't say the album was a failure.
Yeah, they definitely still
garnished
broke.
enough, attention for them to, have a, set up the foundation for a career, and it broke through into the mainstream.
Sure.
But like looking back at the Radiohead legend, that's the story. Is like Pablo Honey was bad, and they fixed it with the bands.
They're like, our bad?
Yeah, we
Sorry
can do
about
better. Yeah. Any other examples you can think of?
I mean, you're probably not going to like this, but I think that U2 glowed up a lot between album 1 and album 2.
Yeah.
I mean, I almost never listened to their debut.
I
And
did for
know
the first time in it's always an album I liked a lot, but reading the Bono book, I listened to debut all the way through, and I love that album. I think it's a great album. And
they didn't flop, so I guess that kind of fails the question too.
Yeah,
but
it was
for
like
me,
successful enough for them.
Shit. I mean, that's a.
I'll give you another example, and Rolling Stone just contradicted this, but Nirvana, Bleach didn't really do anything.
Yeah.
And the only reason Bleach is on that list at all is because Nevermind was so successful. Like Nevermind was so huge that it propelled Bleach into being a good album as well.
Well, maybe Soundgarden could also kind of fall into that category.
That's what I was saying, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I think now that there's been some time to separate the release, people revere all the Soundgarden kind of equally. But yeah, at the time of release, I think they glowed up on their second record. Man, I mean, even I would say to a certain extent System of a Down, because like Toxicity was 10 times bigger than the self-titled, even though the self-titled was still quite big.
Radiohead was the only real example that I had coming in, but I was brainstorming some other ones. Gorillaz made the list for me. The first album was good, and it had Clint Eastwood, which was really successful. But then again, like second album, Demon Days, blew it out of the water so far.
Yeah.
And really, like, I think only made the first album relevant because it was as successful as it was.
Sure. Man, that's a good question. I wish I would have thought of some more. I think for me it's hard too, because if I listen to a band that I'm discovering for the first time, like I said, I'm usually going newest to oldest. And I'd say it's like 60-40 that I don't make it all the way back to their debut records all the time.
Yeah.
Like bands like King Giz, I guess. King Giz, like even though their first record is super popular, and obviously like from a cult perspective, like Giz has always been popular, and Giz fans always talk about early Giz being the best Giz. But like I didn't get it even really until album 2, where I was just like, I don't think this is for me at all. And then on album 2, I was like, oh, maybe this is for me a little bit. And then album 3, it's like, oh no, I like this. And then album 4, it's like, this is great. Like every time it's just a little bit closer to something that I fuck with.
So there are definitely bands like who break the mold where it's like didn't succeed on 1 or 2, kind of toiled in obscurity for several albums. And then like Portugal the Man's one of those. Like put out just a bunch of indie releases that weren't great, didn't really do anything for them, and then did an Evil Friends or something, like several albums in, or In the Mountain in the Cloud.
Sure. I mean the National is kind of like
National,
that.
Yeah.
The National debut is popular too, but Alligator is also like 10 times as popular as the first one, and it also like cements them as what they are to the fans a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
That could be a good one. Muse. Origin of Symmetry was Origin of Symmetry will forever and always probably be my favorite Muse record, but they got commercially successful with the release of the second one.
Yeah. Did that have like Knights of Caledonia on it?
Knights of Sidonia.
Sidonia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Sidonia.
Yeah, that record fucking rips.
That was a good
I actually no, Knights of Sidonia is on Absolution, I think. It's on the second one.
Yeah, second one.
Yeah.
That's what I meant.
Okay,
Yeah,
sorry. I thought you were
that's
talking about Origin.
No. I don't even know if I've ever listened to the first Muse record.
It's so good.
Word.
It's
Check it out.
oh. I also have that on vinyl too. That's the only Muse
We'll do a
record that
little
I have.
record listening party. Speaking of Gorillaz, Blur is kind of like that too, like what we were talking about. The first Blur album flopped, and that's when they pivoted. We're like, we're gonna do British music, and we're really successful with their later releases.
Like if British doesn't work, we're going Australian.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't work, we're gonna do hard German accents.
Hard German. We're moving to Thailand. Well, dude, good sode.
Yeah, man. I
feel good about our list.
I can't believe I'm gonna say this, but I think we talked about everyone on my list.
Yeah.
Oh no, we missed one.
Who is it?
Ken Mode.
Ah.
But yeah, again, if we're talking about bands that shattered the mold. Ken Mode still hasn't really broken through yet on a large scale, but I sure hope they do because they're fucking great.
You got me listening to that first Ken Mode record. It's heavy as fuck.
It's heavy as fuck, and again,
I liked that record.
Solid proof of concept. Like from Loved to Null to even the last one, Void. Like the art is similar, the production value is similar, the heaviness is always consistent throughout, but they're finding new ways to like add texture to the heaviness. And so I think breaking out with Loved and immediately being balls to the walls heavy is a really hard thing to do, but then like finding ways to refine that and prove to people that it's not like a one and done record is even harder. So fucking love Ken Mode for that. That's it though. We talked about everything else.
I just realized I called the Arctic Monkeys album Whatever You Say I Am. It's Whatever People Say
Whatever
I Am.
People
I just
Say I
remembered
Am.
that. Whatever People Say I Am. So, correction there. And on that note, we can wrap it up.
I got pissed like a fucking racehorse.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening.
I'm gay.
Goodbye.